Welcome to the Church of Obelisk. Today we're going to talk about Helm of the Dominator, one of the most fun items in the game, but when should you actually buy this item and when is it better to skip on this item? All that coming up right now.
My holiness deepens.
Tomorrow I'm going to put out a follow-up video on how to actually use Dominator and the creeps it provides. So you don't want to miss that. I invite you to join the fold and subscribe to this channel down below and click the little bell button so you get notified when that video is posted. So what does Helm of Dominator actually do? It's an item that costs 2,400 gold. The components are a headdress, broadsword, a crown and a 300 gold recipe. It gives you 7 to all stats and it gives you an aura that provides 20% bonus damage and 5 HP regen. And this aura also has a 50% boost for player-controlled non-hero units. That is, everything that's controlled by a player and not a hero gets this basically 30% bonus damage and 7.5 HP regen per second. And for these purposes, creep heroes are also counted as not heroes. And of course, Dominator gives you the Dominate ability, which allows you to take over a non-ancient creep. Also doesn't work on necro units or creep heroes, and also not on catapults. And what this gives the unit is it sets the minimum HP at 1500 and also gives it 425 movement speed. So these creeps are quite strong and quite fast, but as a drawback, this creep also gets a gold bounty of 200 if the enemy kills it, but its XP bounty is unchanged. So what determines whether you should actually buy a Dominator? Let's start with the positive first, the factors that speak in favor of buying Dominator. The first is if you have some sort of very strong synergy with Dominator and your hero. So for example on Darkseer, if you have Dominator, you can Iron Shell a creep for both fighting and farming. You can surge that creep to give it a lot of movement speed. And if you get a Centaur, you can even set up a vacuum into stomp combo if you can manage to pull it off. That's very devastating. Or of course Core IO, it's not really played anymore these days, but if it ever comes back into the meta, it's probably going to be with Helm of the Dominator, just because you get a lot of movement speed from that dominant creep if you tether to it, and just the combination of this creep allows you to farm a lot faster. Another example is Lycan, of course, as an aura that boosts the damage of your creep. It also has an ultimate, of course, that gives you hasted movement speed and a crit. And the aura from Dominator also boosts the damage of your own innate summons, of your wolves and later your necro units. So Dominator, a really good item on Lycan, obviously. The second factor is if you can get it early. Dominator is a much stronger item if you can get it early. If you can get it like 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes, it's incredibly strong. You have this 1500 HP creep, which is much more HP than any heroes can have at this stage of the game. You have this creep moving at 425 movement speed, which is a lot faster than most heroes at that stage. And at this stage, the creep also still deals a respectable amount of right-click damage, especially with the aura boosting it further. So if you can get this item really early on, it's very, very strong. And conversely, if you get it later on, it falls off a lot. That is, if you get this item on a core who farms well on laning stage and can also rush this item, it's very, very potent. So an example would be Visage. With Visage, you don't really need any particular item in the early game. You're not really looking to build up stats or anything like that. And you can just start with the headdress and 3 branches if you're in mid, and just immediately go into Dominator with maybe like a Blightstone and a stick thrown in if necessary. Another example of that is Core Chen. You can once again start with the headdress and then just rush for Dominator right away because you don't need any other items in the early game. And because you can take over range creeps, you get to last hit really well, and this often gives you a Dominator timing of something like 6 minutes, and that's just something that most safe laners can't really stand against. So the general rule of thumb is either you rush Dominator or you just skip it entirely. Now, it's not always wrong to get late in the game. Some heroes that just really benefit from auras, like you might buy it on something like Avenge because of her illusion that she leaves behind after death, building aura items on her, is very valuable. But generally, if you want to go for Dominator, you want to rush it. That's also why you generally don't see Dominator build a lot on supports, because supports just don't have the kind of farm in the early game to get a Dominator at like sub 8 minutes. And then the third factor that speaks in favor of Dominator is if your own hero or heroes on your team have summons that benefit a lot from the aura, or just have cores in your team that benefit a lot from this bonus damage aura. Now, summons obviously get a stronger aura. They get this 30% damage boost instead of the 20%. And if you have any sort of summons that do a lot of right-click damage, like Lycan's Wolves or Visage's Familiars, having this damage aura is great. You have to watch out that this is base damage, so if you have summons that get a lot of bonus damage, it's not as strong. For example, on Lone Druid, Dominator is just not a good item anymore, because you only get this 30% bonus on the 30 base damage that your bear has, so that's 9 bonus damage, which just isn't very much. And you also, of course, no longer have the Battle Cry ability, which made Dominator a good item in the past. This change in 7.23 from an attack speed aura to a bonus damage aura also makes the item worse on a hero like Chen, because your groups get bonus damage from your persuasion, but of course this bonus damage isn't amplified by Dominator aura anymore. You also want to look at your cores and see how much they benefit from a bonus damage aura. They only get 20%, but that's still plenty if you have heroes that buy a lot of stat items or attack speed items, whereas if you have heroes that buy a lot of bonus damage items or have bonus damage abilities innately, then that makes Dominator weaker. So for example, you have a TA on your team, Dominator aura is not going to help her very much. She doesn't have that much base damage, she doesn't really build stat items, it's more about damage items like Desolator. Whereas if you have a hero like Luna or Drow Ranger as one of your cores, they benefit a lot more from this aura. Now let's look at the factors that speak against buying Helm of Dominator. So first of all, Dominator loses some value if you have already access to creeps on your team. Obviously, if you already have someone who has Dominator, you generally don't want to buy a second Dominator because the auras don't stack, and also the auras that get provided by Dominator creeps don't stack, so you can't have like 2 Alpha Wolf auras. And similarly, if you have a Chen on your team, Dominator creeps go down slightly in value because you can only have 1 aura active at any one time, you can only have 1 Alpha Wolf aura, you can only have 1 Cloak aura, and so on. And there's also only a limited supply of good creeps available. The second factor is if you're playing against heroes who can easily remove your creeps. So if you're playing against Doom, he can just eat your creeps. Similarly, if you're playing against Klings, you can eat your creeps with his new Death Pact ability. If you're playing against Enigma, you can convert your level 4 and lower creeps into Eidolons. So it doesn't work on things like a Hellbear Smasher or a Centaur Conqueror, but it does work on smaller creeps like the Alpha Wolf or the Ogre Frost Mage. And if you have a Chen or Enchantress on the enemy team, they can obviously take over your Dominator creep and get a lot of value from that. Now you can take the creep back, but then they can just convert it back again, and their ability has a lot shorter cooldown than yours, so you're generally going to lose that war. And then number 3, you generally don't want to buy a Dominator if you want to scale through right clicks on your hero. It will help you fight and also farm early, but in the long run, investing in something like a Maelstrom is a lot better for your scaling. And this of course conflicts a bit with the idea that you want to get Dominator very early. So you want to get it very early, so you want to have a hero that farms well, but you also want it to be a hero that doesn't want to scale through right clicks. So a hero like Lycan, who farms reasonably well in the lane, but doesn't really build traditional right click items, is a good candidate. Whereas a hero like Drow, even if she has a good laning stage and would be able to get this item very early, does not really benefit from Helm of Dominator that much. And sure, in the early game it's great, it's one of the best DPS items even in the early game, but this damage just doesn't scale as well. So putting it all together, which heroes want to buy Dominator? Well, Lycan and Visage are pretty much in the almost always buy category. They just have so much synergy with that item, and I just can't really see myself skipping that unless it's like a really bad game for Dominator. Similarly, Core Io and Core Chen should almost always go for Dominator, but if you play this hero as support, Dominator is generally not a very good item, just because you don't get it early enough for it to really pay off. It's usually better to get other items, like an early mech for example. For Darkseer, Dominator is really strong if you're having a good laning stage and get the item early, but if you don't have a good start, for the reasons we talked about, you generally should not go to Dominator and instead just get something like a mech. Beastmaster is another strong candidate for Dominator because he has summons and he has an aura that synergizes really well with the damage aura provided by the new Dominator. The problem here is just that Beastmaster wants to get a lot of other items early on. So he really likes some early phase boots. You also kind of like to get a Vlad's. Medallion is great to get early on Beastmaster. And if you can get an early Necro, it's also really strong on Beastmaster. So Dominator competes with a lot of other strong items in Beastmaster, so that's why it's a more situational item on him. And then just generally any sort of offlaner who doesn't really need any particular item right away and can afford to go for Dominator can definitely go for this item if it fits into the team. So for example, Dominator is perfectly viable in a hero like Abaddon or Brewmaster. And just generally any sort of hero that doesn't want to scale with right clicks and has really good farm at the start can consider going for Dominator. Just because if you get the item early, it's so strong. This is why, for example, sometimes the Enigmas going for Dominator also has some synergy with the Igenons and so on. But mostly it's just because if you're playing Enigma and you get some uninterrupted jungle farm, you just farm really quickly. Coming up, we're going to talk about how to actually use your Dominator once you've bought it. How do you micro creep? What are some of the things you have to watch out for? So if you haven't joined the fold yet, please subscribe and ring the little bell button. And in the meantime, you can watch these other videos. And I'll see you there. May Obelisk watch over you.